Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this episode of Nerd Caliber. I'm here with, how would you pronounce your cosplay name?
Etaru.
Tell us what you're going to showcase for our viewers today.
Yeah, so this is Aloy, the heavy ice hunter Banuk version from Horizon Zero Dawn. Uh, this is the entire costume on the mannequin here today that I'll be, happy to show you all the details about. The headpiece I'm wearing and wig, obviously, and then we have the spear as well that she carries throughout the game as, fun prop to show. Uh, I was crafting this for about the latter half of 2019, and it was just a really fun experience. I've gotten to use skills and learn skill sets where that I didn't get a chance to before. So it was very much a learning, growing opportunity.
Okay, so how did you? What's the initial steps you took into making this outfit?
The game, most of the outfits, because they're in a hyper futuristic world where humanity is kind of gone back to the basics and tribal societies, they're working with natural fibers, natural leathers, and then pieces of machinery kind of sewed on or haphazardly, strung together as armor. So it really made the most sense for me to try and recreate this to be as functional as possible and used as natural materials as possible. So, with the exception of the armor bits, which are all craft foam, some of them also warbler, majority of the costume, including the bow quiver here, uh, all of the blue pieces, as well as the pouches in the belt, those are all leather. This is all natural leather. It was all veg tan leather that I cut myself, that I hand dyed or hand colored, and then weathered and did all of the trim and fur by hand as well. So tried to make it as realistic and original to uh, the source material as I could. And what it ended up being is using techniques that they probably would have had at their disposal as well. Because you can't really machine stitch leathers like this unless you have an industrial strength um, sewing machine or serger, which they probably didn't either. So I ended up hand sewing quite a bit and learning techniques and leather stitches like the saddle stitch to put some of the heavier pieces together with wax thread, just like they do with really saddles. And I think those are techniques that realistically, if you put a cartoon, a fantasy video game into the real world, is what they would have had available. So that's, I think, what added to the authenticity to it, but also created that great challenge and going that step ahead of I could do this with fabrics and find thick suedes and such, do it with. But if it's going to cost about the same, why not take that step further and go with leather that's going to be durable, functional, it's going to last a long time, and quite frankly, was very warm to wear in the winter. So it was kind of accurate in that sense.
Okay, what did you ever make anything out of leather before? I just, like myself, I'm trying to imagine like what would it be like to make a leather outfit. I just want to know where to begin.
Uh, you begin with trial and error and watching a lot of YouTube videos because leather crafting is a very specific uh, art form, and there's a lot of tutorials on it. Anyone who works in leather are extremely excited to tell others how to do it. Um, what I ended up doing with this is I was expanding on the few leather skills that I already had. So the prior year, I made Cassandra from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and she had a few leather bits here and there that I learned leather tooling with. But I didn't actually have to stitch anything together. I wasn't making full garments out of leather. I was just putting little pieces here and there of, kind of a vagrant warrior. Whereas with Aloy, it had to be functional, it had to be full pieces. These skirts were all, there's 4 flaps of them sewn with a continuous saddle stitch. And that's not something that I would have expected to have to do until I got the leather and started realizing I can't use normal thread on this. I can't use my sewing machine on this. There's an accuracy level to it, certainly, but now I have to use techniques that are actually very well learned and very well taught that I'm really grateful that there were tutorials to do it.
Okay. And I apologize if you answered this already, but how did you color the leather? What did you use for that?
This is actually a leather paint. So they didn't make specific paints just for leathers. The underside you'll see is the original color of leather. So this is kind of the suede, softer side of it, and I use the more waxy side, the right side of the canvas. Basically, I went through and did a full base layer of the turquoise, then the blue on top, and then started kind of stenciling in all of the snow and weather damage. And this was where there was a learning curve of perfectionism that I had to overcome. And anyone who's a type A personality or is an absolute perfectionist with costumes will probably know what I mean. When you have to start weathering it, you have to start chipping things up, and I had to use sandpaper to start making it look weathered and old and used, functional. And if you're a perfectionist who's used to details and elaborate costumes that need to look very precise and completed, marking up your costume intentionally feels like a personal, vendetta against yourself. It's really difficult to overcome, to say this has to look accurate. I have to start marking it up. I have to start making intentional mistakes on it. And oh boy, that was a heck of a thing to overcome. Trying to make this not look pristine and perfect, and uh, pieces of leather out of place and scuffs and scratch marks was not physically difficult to do, but a mental challenge that I had to overcome because I haven't had to do that before.
Okay. Let's talk about the wig and the headgear. Was it is was what's your technique for putting this wig together?
So Aloy's hair is humongous. She has a full, very voluminous head of hair. Kind of looks like she puts it in dreads and probably never washes it outside of jumping the stream. So, in order for this to work, I had to basically weft about 2, 3 wigs together. And she has a natural gradient of blonde to the ends of it. So I wefted in blonde pieces to kind of give that red to blonde ombre to it. Once I had all of those extra wefts, which makes it quite heavy, there's a ton of small braids going throughout it, very kind of tribal feel to it. And then the headpiece, which is completely nonsensical, but you have to follow the design. This was just modeled out of craft foam that I started patterning together and putting together on a mannequin head, and made the leather ribbons for it as well. So it goes really far back, and I always have to be wary of like sitting back too far because suddenly I'll, bump because there's a foot extension of wings out of them.
Okay. Now it's your prop, your weapon. Now, is that made of the same material as your headgear?
It is. So this is all craft foam. Uh, I have a wooden dowel in the center of it for stability, and then this is all craft foam. I cut it up, painted it, scuffed it, weathered it so that it just looks like a wood spear that she kind of basically throws a ton of leather and metal materials on to make a makeshift weapon. And then at the end of it here, you have this woven, supposed to be leather textile with a grip. I made it out of craft foam as well. And she has her little hacking box on the bottom that she haphazardly ties, and you're using that frequently in the game to hack some of the machines so that you can disassemble them or ride them.
Okay. What do you do to keep the costume and the props in good condition? I know leather could be very um, I don't want to say sensitive, particular when it comes to like keeping it in good condition.
Yeah, it does degrade because it's a natural material. The spear I actually have hanging on my wall. I have a small wall over the windows where I'll hang uh, my spear, prop guns, swords for other cosplays, just so they're out of the way. They look like, nice when they're displayed. And I'm able to, pick them up quickly and go as opposed to finding some place to store them. That's a little bit more out of the way. As far as for leather care, they do recommend you use a sealant after you paint it. So while there's some natural chipping that I encouraged on it in order to make it look more accurate to the source material, there is actually a weather seal to it so that it is protected from dust, from sunlight, from moisture. The pieces are stored separately. These flaps, this large kind of skirt, hangs by itself, and then the rest of the pieces are layered in a bag together, making sure that they're not squished, that the craft foam doesn't change shape and morph because under pressure or weight, it'll change shape very easily. And then there's a few 3D printed pieces on here that I'm really happy that the costume is functional because I can just put them into the leather pouches and store them all together so I'm not missing anything. And they're protected that way.
Okay. If you were to start this process all over again to make this costume, what would you do differently?
I would have started the 3D piece printing much sooner. I don't think that it's particularly difficult. It's just that when I originally started this costume, this was in November of 2019. I had about a month and a half to finish it because I really wanted to shoot this in Yellowstone. I was going to be visiting my family in Montana for the holidays, and they agreed to help me go to Yellowstone National Park to the northern part called Mammoth Springs, where it's the only part open in the wintertime to cars, and shoot it because it would be actually accurate to the game. The Banuk tribe in the Frozen Wilds expansion lives in what is Yellowstone today. When I did that, I had to use uh, the smartest techniques that I could to get it done as quickly as possible. So I didn't have the full headgear finished at the time. A lot of the 3D printed pieces weren't done just because I was under the time crunch. So I think I definitely would have started those sooner. Because as it turns out, when I came back and wanted to wear this at Katsucon about 2 months later, uh, everyone that I know, their 3D printer was failing. It was having some kind of technical issues, and it came together all very last minute because of it. So I would have started the parts that I knew the least amount first, and then gone to the parts that I know the most about because I knew that I could complete them myself after.
Okay. A question about the fur or the fur that's on the costume. Did you is that to get put together with glue or how did you do that?
Yeah, it's contact cement.
Okay.
Yep. So this is all fur trim. I had to cut it down to size. I styled it just a little bit to get, the right level of fluffiness to it, make sure it doesn't look like a shag carpet. And it's the same one on the quiver as well. So that's all glued together. Um, Although in a few places I did hand stitch it. For instance, like on the quiver, this is all leather hand stitched done.
How much time and how much money did you put into this costume?
When I finished the medium version, because in the game, every single costume has like three versions, and each one progressively gets more armor and more abilities. So when I finished the medium, I would say I had about a month and a half. And when I came back from the holidays and had to get it ready for Katsucon, I would say about 3 months in total was the amount of time that was put into this. The cost was fairly minimal. I would say I kept it under 200, 250 probably, because I owned a lot of the leathers already. They were earmarked for another project I had. And when I finished the game and really wanted to do Aloy and realized I had a lot of the leathers already, I was able to save on quite a bit of cost because I didn't have to pay for extra shipping or trying to find um, leather distributors during the holidays.
Is there anything else about the costume that I haven't asked you that you want to share? Whether it be the costume, the props, or the wig and helmet?
So there's a few little details on here that I was really proud of that it kind of show up in photos. Sometimes they don't. One of the things is putting a little bit more detail than already what's in it, which seems silly for a Horizon Zero Dawn because there's no simple costumes from it. But for instance, for her scarf, I found on Spoonflower a circuit board fabric. I think works really well with the mixture of tribal and advanced technology. So there's little things like that that are peppered throughout it. I used silks and cottons for the belt because I wanted to use natural fibers. I wanted to stick with that theme of, all right, if I'm going with all natural leathers, why am I going to use a polyester or a pont or something to do this? Let's stay consistent with it. And then one of the funny things is because my parents own a small farm in Montana, every time that I'm there, I start just collecting things in the yard. So the feathers on the spear are actually from feathers collected in my parents' yard, either from birds of prey who lost them or from like their geese. So they were all colored. They were dyed and colored myself, but they were organically found. So, you know, I could definitely have bought them, but it makes me giggle a little bit that there's goose and chicken feathers from our own animals included in this costume.
Why did you choose to cosplay this character?
I really loved the story of Horizon Zero Dawn. I am chronically late to playing everything that's new. It came out in 2017 and I didn't touch the game until 2019. And then of course, as I played through it and wanted to then try and recreate the costumes, even though I've seen people do it for years very, very well, you know, I kind of fell behind. And there was something to it that I wanted to find a costume and I wanted to find a version of the character that I really connected with. And what I really loved there was the Banuk tribe, as I said, is in Yellowstone Park, which is basically my backyard. I grew up living very near to it. So it's going through the game and seeing like the geysers and the hot pools loosely recreated from the actual park, I thought was just incredibly nostalgic. So there was an element of nostalgia just imbued in the entire costume as I'm crafting it and looking forward to shooting someplace that I grew up near that I'm very familiar with, and knowing that it probably brought some kind of awe and inspiration to everybody else who played it and maybe who have never been there.
Okay. Um, for anyone that wants to that sees this and they get inspired to cosplay this character, any last tips or advice before they begin?
Don't get overwhelmed. Every single costume of Aloy's is incredibly detailed. I was very lucky to be able to wear this at Katsucon with one of my best friends, Rin Cosplay. She and I made our spears at the same time, so we were able to use the same patterns and start putting them together and commiserate about the frustrations regarding it. So I would say take it one piece at a time. Any complex costume, break it down into segments and sections, try and budget it out by section, and try and time it out by section. So there's a lot of project management to it. And you're not going to feel as overwhelmed if you say, this week I'm going to tackle just the belt. Next week I'm going to tackle just the quiver. After that, I'm going to tackle just the armor pieces. Every single one of the costumes has so many little things. You're bound to miss something or other. And the joy of it is in finding all those little pieces and all of those details and nuggets of inspiration. And if everything isn't there, don't worry about it. Aloy probably lost it somewhere along the way in the game anyway.
Excellent. So before we sign off, for anyone who wants to see more of your cosplay work, where can it go?
They can go to Facebook. I'm under Etaru Cosplay there. And I'm under just Etaru on Instagram or etarucosplay.com, which is my portfolio domain with a lot of my old costumes, some of my most of my new stuff. And then if they want to see the in progress build of this costume, it's in my Instagram stories so that they can kind of see the little details and frustrations that I met, and hopefully it helps them and inspires them or gives them ideas of different ways to approach a costume as unique as this.
Okay, excellent. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to all of us about your costume. Fantastic job. And to our viewers out there, yes, stay tuned for more cosplay content. Thank you, everyone.